On this video, we are doing something a little bit different. The idea is to have a conversation with different professional simulation modelers that use different simulation tools to see what the different experiences they have when they tackle their own simulation-related projects. So we have on the panel Jacob Ingalls, who is an expert in Simio, and Christian Bezzi, who is an expert in plan simulation and FlexSim. And I will add my own spice with my experience in AnyLogic and other software I have some experience with. So the idea is to talk about animation, debugging, and other topics that are relevant for the simulation practitioners of the world. And we will see what different paradigms and different ideas each one of us have when we tackle simulation projects. So let's get started. Well, thank you for being here, and let's hope we can have fun with a simulation conversation. We all use different simulation tools, which is something we don't talk about too much.
Once people get into an ecosystem, they rarely leave.
Yeah, we get embedded in our own tool forever. That is true.
The learning curve is really steep, so
it can be, yeah.
So that is something I want to talk about. But before we talk about anything, let's introduce each other, because we want to put this online so people can watch it. So we're gonna have the experience of different people who work with simulations, with different tools, with different industries, and see what their feelings are. In particular, where the things that are great about the simulation tools they use, the shortcomings, the difficulties, the great things. I want to talk also a bit generative AI in the application of simulations and other things. And I don't know if this conversation will go for an hour. If we have fun, we can extend it to as long as we want, as long as we have time.
Cool.
Very cool.
Okay, so let's introduce each other. So Jacob, tell us, like, what do you do? What is your experience? What software have you used? What industries do you work in? And everything you can tell us.
Well, let's see. It's I've been in and out of simulation since about 2008. I come from a pretty unique perspective. I have 2 degrees in finance. I don't have anything in industrial engineering or systems or whatever. To the best of most people's knowledge, I'm the first second-generation simulationist. My father, Dr. Ricky Ingalls, has been in this space since the 80s. He's currently no longer in simulation, but he was in it for a long time, was the chair of WinterSim. I've done full-time consulting at Diamond Head. I worked in steel manufacturing at Webco Industries, which is the largest steel tube manufacturer in the United States. When I was there, we did between 2 and 3 billion feet of steel tube a year. So it's pretty high volume manufacturing. From there, I went to the Red Cross, where I actually used AnyLogic. And then from there, I was at FedEx Ground for about 6 years, doing a lot of simulation and process improvement, mainly using Simio. From there, I went to a company called Outrider, which is industrial autonomous vehicles. Then I went to Shutterfly, which is custom like Christmas cards and yearbooks and things like that for consumer manufacturing. And currently I am unemployed, looking for work. So if you know anybody that needs anybody, please let me know. But yeah, that's me. I have developed in the 3 major simulation softwares, FlexSim, AnyLogic, and Simio. But when it comes down to it, I'm about as OG as it gets with Simio. I was Diamond Head, where I started, we were their first partner in the United States. We were the first ones using it, commercially for consulting projects. So I've been around that software since the beginning. So I know it really well.
So it's Simio, AnyLogic, and what else?
FlexSim.
FlexSim.
Yeah. They just got sold, or they just sold out to Autodesk. That's a pretty big shift in the paradigm of everything.
Yeah,
that's crazy. Yeah, that's true.
Huge change.
And so you have been working mostly in manufacturing. right?
A lot of it was some form of manufacturing. I mean, FedEx, which was, like I said, like 6 years, I probably did at least 50 simulation projects there. A lot of that was around material handling design, not necessarily manufacturing, but it was still inside the four walls. But, I've done rail simulations, I've done food processing simulations, I've done, like I said, autonomous vehicles, multiple autonomous vehicle projects across at FedEx and at Outrider. Um, Scheduling projects, especially at Webco. We did a big scheduling project there through the Simio scheduler. So I've been in a bunch of different industries for
Awesome.
sure.
Well, that's what we want to have these conversations. So yeah, let's talk about all your experience a little bit later. So Christian, what about you?
Well, I have had three major career transitions. I was in the army at the beginning. I was a lieutenant, so no simulation there whatsoever. And then when I was 28, I decided to leave the army, and so I applied to Georgia Tech and to do a master's degree in order to introduce myself into the industry. And there was the year 2000. I got my first contact with the simulation, and it was like love at first sight. I loved it. It was Arena at that time. I've done a project with an engineering company in Atlanta for 6 months at that time, customizing some objects for outbound outbound flow from a Toyota car plant. Then I tried to have a job in this field, but I couldn't. It was in Europe was the introduction of the euro, a lot of changes, and I started my career in operations, logistic operations, and so with the DHL 1 year, no simulation at that time. Then I moved to Brazil, where I am now, and still in operations with the Ryder, the American branch, Brazilian branch of the American Ryder in São Paulo for 1 year. Then I moved to Belo Horizonte, where I am now in CNH. Case New Holland is construction equipment, heavy equipment like backhoe loaders, wheel loaders, graders, and bulldozers. And I was responsible for logistical operations, so line feeding, warehousing, receiving, and then planning. I've worked there for 8 years, but with no simulation yet. I was trying to join simulation, but simulation market in Brazil was still not taking off, And then when I moved in 2012 in Aetra Automotive System is a supplier of metallic components and welded parts for the automotive sector. So there, I finally convinced my director to invest in a simulator that at that time was plant simulation by Technomatics Siemens, because here both Fiat FCA and Volkswagen were using plant simulation, because Siemens, it has this software ecosystem with Teamcenter and Process Simulate, Line Designer. They sell all these huge packages of softwares to these car makers. So to stay in line with their choices, I chose plant simulation at that time. And my major project at that time was the simulation modeling of engine plant, because in 2015, Fiat was switching of engine, going from the fire engine to Firefly, another type of engine. And they decided to model all the machining and assembly with plant simulation. So that was my major project with plant simulation. And then when I came back to Aetra, I kept simulating welding processes, production mainly, and line feeding, intralogistics, inside the four walls, as Jacob says, all inside the four walls. And then in the year 2000, I was laid off because of the COVID situation. My company went kind of bankrupting. And so there was a major laying off. And I took the chance to, inspired by Felipe, to freelancing. I said, now or never, you know, and I said that it was something I was thinking since many years. And I said, now or never. So I took the chance, and at that time I had to decide which platform to use. So I have done all the trainings in 2019 in AnyLogic and FlexSim. I already knew plant simulation. I wanted to decide which software to use, and then I decided to go for FlexSim. So since 2018, I simulate with FlexSim as well, and plant simulation, both of them.
Yeah, the choice, how to choose as what simulation software you're going to use is quite difficult unless you quite know exactly what your client needs. But otherwise, it's very difficult to choose. Like, why did you choose FlexSim among all the others? Why not plant simulation, since you already had the most experience in it, right?
Yeah, because I tested it on myself. I think it was faster to model in FlexSim. The speed was the key factor because of process flow, and I thought it was quite easy and faster. You know, plant simulation, it has no such a low code platform as process flow or AnyLogic. It is just hard coding, either 3D or hard coding. There is no low coding. So then you might ask, why not AnyLogic? I thought that FlexSim was more focused on intralogistics, and I felt it was easier to simulate intralogistic processes with FlexSim because of its library, and also the animation you can do, the bone animation you can do with the operators, and the animation you can do also with the processors, the 3D graphics, easiness of the tool. It was a close call between AnyLogic and FlexSim.
Yeah. So, and why? Yeah, but you didn't consider Simio, right? In this.
Yeah, because in Brazil, Simio did not have market at that time. There was no even a partner, a distributor of Simio. I think it started to be sold in 2021 or 22. It's really recent, the introduction of Simio in Brazil.
Really?
Yeah. It was an arena partner in São Paulo and began a couple of years ago to sell Simio.
They've been going through a lot of corporate changes. They appointed a new CEO like 2 years ago, so Simio has been shifting a whole bunch the last couple of years.
Yeah, I heard that. What I find interesting, like in Simio, you have these competitions for university competitions. I don't know if you know about that, Jacob. If you,
I judged one of them.
Okay. So how many people participate in these competitions?
The one I did, I was like 8 universities, I think, and it's not always the same universities that end up participating. The teams were like 2 to 4 people, I think. It's also really interesting because you could definitely tell the kids whose professors were very strong in arena, and the kids whose professors were much more Simio object oriented first. You could definitely tell in the way the models were built. So that I always thought that was interesting.
Yeah, we actually built the last there was a competition 2022, and we built it was a football stadium, soccer stadium, like a soccer match, and we built this, and we put it there in some platform, so if someone can wants to buy the solution, but nobody bought it. Okay, so in terms, how do you have a FlexSim license right now, Christian?
I'm renting it, and
yeah.
now I'm close to closing a deal with FlexSim Brazil to be a partner of them and kind of helping them out both with consultancy and selling as well. I'm not sure if it will be affected, but we are talking in these weeks. I might close a partnership with them.
Yeah.
So I will not be independent anymore as a user. If it.
Yeah, for me, I also rented AnyLogic for quite a while before actually having the license, because the license is quite expensive. So for all this software, is all of them, and in order to get started, even you need to rent it. So this is what I did as well.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you can't, because you don't have you don't have really big projects in the beginning. At least I didn't. And actually, I started with so I use AnyLogic mostly. We have been trying with other simulations software like Simio, FlexSim, visual components as well. We tried with Simidyne, which is agent based, and there's some, I don't understand why some software don't provide like a free version just to learn, because Simio provides a free version, even it's low capabilities, but not even so low. AnyLogic provides a free version, FlexSim provides a free version, Plant Simulation doesn't. You can only get the 30 days trial, but 30 days is not enough if you want to try to at least learn to.
And actually, it's really difficult to get it. I mean, they say that you have this trial, but I have tried. It's not as easy. And I have asked myself this question many times, and my answer is that they have not much interest in selling to small industry. I think Siemens, with these huge platforms, Team Center, they want to sell packages of software. I don't think they're really interested in selling just plant simulation, one of those software. They target our car makers, huge corporation. They want to close huge deals with and selling the whole package, So then they have not such a focus. That's my conclusion.
Yeah, I guess it's the same with visual components. I don't know if any of you have tried this other software.
No, I haven't used that one.
So yeah, well, we're not going to talk a lot about visual components. So what I want to know a little bit from your experiences, from all the simulations you have done, like what are the things that, has there been any project or any piece of project that you were not able to do because the software didn't actually provided you with the tools that you needed?
Oh, absolutely. One of the last things I was doing at FedEx before I left is we were trying to do a yard simulation of trailers and tuggers moving inside a distribution center yard. And Simio's agent-based modeling capabilities at that point was poor, to say the least. I don't know if it's gotten any better. I haven't had a chance to really look at it in the last couple.
But agent-based in Simio is an external library, actually. It's not even, right? It's not even.
Yeah, it's not really in there. You can do it, and you can kind of fake it in some respects, but it kills your runtime. So we weren't able to do that. We were, I don't know what ended up happening with it because I left sort of in the process, but we were actually looking at potentially moving away from Simio when I was leaving. So the last couple of months, we actually got the tours of AnyLogic and FlexSim and just be able to see what all their capabilities were. So I've been able to actually look at them all really close in the last couple of years. But yeah, we weren't able to do that particular safety project because of limitations of Simio.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like Simio, I don't know if this happens everywhere, but Simio has a bad reputation in terms of performance. Simio is known to be slow in comparison to any other thing.
It really depends on how you develop with it. I can see why people would think that. I mean, I've run into issues with AnyLogic. AnyLogic is a lot lighter because there's not, I mean, AnyLogic is pretty ugly. But let's just be straight up with it. Like the graphics and other stuff is not that great, and it's not integrated like it is with Simio and FlexSim, so it can be lighter, but it is a bit of a memory hog. I mean, you boot up Simio, it's going to pull 2.5 gigs of your RAM, but you just have to be really concise with your code. But like any other software, if you're not good with it, like it's going to be bad. Like, you know, Python, if you're not good with how you manage loops and everything else, it's going to be slow, you know? So yes, it can be slow, but it's not that much slower than anything else, in my opinion.
Yeah. So there have been, I talked to someone from Mosim Tech a couple of months ago, and they made a benchmark doing the same exact thing in AnyLogic and Simio. And they said that Simio was 40 times slower. Now, and they also talked to Simio to see if they're actually doing it correctly in Simio. But it also depends on what you're actually simulating, right?
Very much.
What are you really comparing? So you can't only do one benchmark and conclude for everything. But
right.
But it has this. It still has this reputation, no matter what, for some reason.
And I mean, I'll be the first to admit, like can be a very bloated piece of software. But part of that is how it's developed. C# has its issues. But you know, if you're not, you can do a lot of simulations without any visuals inside of Simio, but no one ever does. And that's insanely fast. Just kind of like if you don't have any visuals, AnyLogic, it's a lot faster. So it would be very curious to see what the Mosim Tech guys did. I know a fair amount of those guys. Kind of see what they did and how they did it. You know, and what is 40 times faster or slower or whatever. Like, is it, you know, 1 second versus 40 seconds? Is it half a second? You know, I'd also be considered, like, it'd be interesting to know what the metrics are there.
Unfortunately, I don't know. That's all information I have right about this. But I don't know with software with like plant simulation or FlexSim, what is the feeling you have in terms of execution speed?
It's pretty quick. We had some pretty big models with it at FedEx. There's a couple of features inside of FlexSim that are really powerful and strong, especially in like that world, that like Simio and AnyLogic don't have, which was one reason we were using it for a while. When I came into FedEx, we pretty much went straight Simio just because they didn't want to have to sort of bounce between multiple packages, and that's the one I knew. But there's definitely some really powerful capabilities inside of FlexSim that would make it a very strong candidate for that kind of stuff.
And this project that you were doing in Simio, trying to do agent based, can you do it in FlexSim?
It looked like you could. They have a very similar agent-based system called A*, if memory serves, which is the same kind of library for agent-based that AnyLogic uses. You can also set up like specific windows and like monitoring areas around the agents. It looked like we could. Again, that was one of those things that was happening about the time I was leaving FedEx, so I'm not sure how that all ended up. But it looked like you could in FlexSim.
And what about plant? Well, you mentioned the graphics. It's true that the graphics in AnyLogic are quite far from what FlexSim can do. Like Simio, I would say, is in the middle. Simio still looks a little bit.
It's
ugly,
dated at this point, for sure.
but I think it still looks better than AnyLogic. But FlexSim is just another level in terms of graphics.
Right. Well, and they also, they've integrated with the Unreal Engine from NVIDIA, which is a high-end gaming engine, and that so you can do all sorts of physics-based simulation with it now too. It's really powerful, and I'm curious to see how that's gonna integrate now that they're pulling becoming part of Autodesk, and how that's going to integrate with like AutoCAD and all the other abilities it's going to have. It's going to be a really interesting time for the industry over the next 2 or 3 years, because in general, when simulation platforms get bought, they suck. Like they quit getting invested in, and then that's what happened with Arena. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens.
That's my concern, Jacob. That's my concern. For example, I've seen that plant simulation, since it was Technomatics, and it was an American company. It has been bought around the year 2000, 2001 by Siemens. And I keep track of the innovation launches that they do each year. And I see that plant simulation does not launch many new features every year. But FlexSim, I was comparing every year, they would launch cool stuff, cool improvements. Wow. Every year, new cool features, and plant simulation was really poor in. And now that Autodesk bought FlexSim, I thought the same. Are they gonna slow down the development process? I really hope not.
Oh yeah, that's the question. But in terms of buying things, like you have plant simulation that is now partnered with NVIDIA, so you can create this omniverse. Have you seen that?
With plant simulation? No.
With plant simulation, you can create. I haven't been able to see this really like properly, but you can create an omniverse. I don't know if they use some sort of AI but the graphs look like if it was real. Like it doesn't even look like an animation anymore. But you haven't done anything related to that, right?
Not yet, no.
Yeah,
I'm not aware of this in correlation with the omniverse, plant simulation and omniverse. I'm aware of this. What Jacob said about FlexSim, this collaboration with NVIDIA, with this integration. Yeah, it grows expectation for the future.
Well, I was hoping to know a little bit more about this, but I'm also a bit. I just know very superficially about this right now.
I think the graphic is also a nice topic to talk about. For example, I think plant simulation is easier for me to import 3D from AutoCAD, DWG, or STEP kind of files. At the beginning of the project, I always, you have to import 3D graphics of a machine.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a challenge. And FlexSim, plant simulation, it has this embedded tool that shrinks down the whole size of the graphics. It's embedded. This is useful, something that I have not seen in FlexSim. And I think FlexSim at the moment is not really compatible with DWGs or STEP. But it is with Collada, .dae format, Collada. Yeah, there is a compatibility. It's easier to import graphics from that platform, SketchUp platform, but not from AutoCAD platforms, Inventor platforms. I think the graphics, it loses the formats in my experience. And when I saw that AutoCAD bought FlexSim, the first thing I was thinking is that, well, they are going to improve this integration in importing all the sort of formats, because I lose many hours in trying to fix these graphic problems. It's time consuming.
Yeah, it's similar to the reason why we were considering to use visual components, because in visual components you can import a 3D file and transform it into some sort of agent. So if you import something that has a door, you can just click on the door and make it animate the opening and closing of the door. And you can do that with any complexity. So you just import the 3D, and it can be a robot with 5 arms. It doesn't matter. Like, it will be very simple to animate each part independently. And a lot of clients, sometimes they want to see a very realistic simulation model, which is sometimes impossible to do in AnyLogic. I mean, it's possible, but the amount of time it takes to build something very customized to a level of detail that would take too long. So we were considering using visual components. Also, last year, there was a client, I was working with a client, and they wanted to see, we did a simulation in AnyLogic, but they wanted more details. So I had to transfer them to someone else who was doing visual components. So they did that part in visual components. And this is a feature that is so useful. Like, if you can import a 3D object from AutoCAD, and you can transform that into an agent that can move according to the elements of this 3D object, that's very useful. And
I totally agree.
Yeah, this is one of the things I would love to have in AnyLogic, but it will never happen, because AnyLogic is not, it doesn't have that purpose. AnyLogic is more like a versatile thing where you can do anything, but sometimes that anything can take much longer if it's very detailed thing. And in terms of graphs, also, when I put something with a lot of detail in AnyLogic, very good, because you can do super beautiful graphs in AnyLogic, the same level as FlexSim, but it takes way too long to render. So it's impossible to really do.
Yeah, it's very much the question of, is it worth the effort? And that's always an issue. Depending on the projects I've had to work on, like, some people are like, it's got to be perfectly detailed, and others, it's like, it doesn't matter as long as it runs, right? So, I mean, that animation, even in Simio, which is its sort of inherent, can take a while to make it look really pretty. And it's just a pain.
Yeah, plant simulation is also, like, animation-wise, is pretty impressive. And yeah, there are other software that they don't even care about animation. Like, you have, for example, this new one that is called Hash, or you have Simio who doesn't matter. The animation doesn't even matter, because they want to optimize. So something like with Simio, if you do an agent-based model, you can just run millions and millions of agents without problem. Well, you cannot do that in AnyLogic. It becomes very slow.
Right.
Yeah, the other thing about AnyLogic graphs is these people who don't work, they move like this. And one time a client said, no, I cannot accept this. I need to see them walk. So we couldn't do that.
Wow, that's pretty crazy.
Plant simulation as well. They are rigid, static. They don't move any arm, any leg. Yeah.
Well, in FlexSim they move pretty nicely. That's true. But it's also, I mean, from an operational perspective, it's kind of useless if you see them move or not. In general, nobody cares. It's like in 99% of the cases, nobody cares if the people move like this or not.
I mean, the visualization helps especially for buy-in. Simio actually has a pretty good ability to import CAD drawings of different, DWGs, DFXs, whatever. I can't remember all the extensions. And that's something, especially when I was at FedEx, like, you show everyone the model, they're like, whatever, but you throw that CAD drawing underneath it, and the design engineers see their drawing. all of a sudden the world makes sense to them, and the buy-in is just so much faster that way.
Yeah, it's important, but also you have to consider that people are very easily impressed with very small things, because in particular someone who has never seen a simulation, you can show you something extremely ugly and they will be impressed anyways. That is the reality.
Well, I think part of it is, at least in my experience, is yes, they can be impressed, but if they don't understand simulation, they're the first to be like, this isn't legit. And that's always the hardest part by it, going, especially somewhere new where they're not used to it, is getting them to trust the model. And sometimes those visualizations, even simple, can really help them trust the model that it's accurate, because it moves like they think it should in their head,
Yeah, but on that regard, I don't think, like, if you have an animation in AnyLogic which is a little bit uglier than FlexSim, I don't know if people make a difference in their perception of how real it looks, because it still looks real and it's still believable. The only thing that is a bit different maybe is, like, if you want to reach a level of detail where you want to see the exact robot that they have in the plant, and you need to have this library that Visual Component has, these libraries of robots. FlexSim also has them, where you can just import the robot that already exists and you can see the real robot. In that case, yeah,
I think it has this engagement factor. The animation engages all the team, and the buy-in, as Jacob said, the buy-in is quite faster. But in intralogistics, in my case, I have a lot of operation with pickings, and to be able to show the picking, how the picking takes place, I think it's useful. Yeah.
But for example, has there been a case, for example, in FlexSim you can just see the people like grabbing objects, for example. Has there been a case who actually someone has cared about that?
Actually, I have a client that they want to use some FlexSim videos as a marketing tool to market they have call system, material call system buttons, where I've imported the button, and so I have animated a FlexSim operator in pressing the button and give a thumbs up. And they're going to use this video as a marketing tool of their button,
Yeah, right. That's important, actually. True. I've been asked plenty of times to do this kind of videos. Sometimes the AnyLogic visualization doesn't allow really to make a really high quality one. So yeah, you're right in that regard.
It's an intermediate tool. Let's say there are some software, I don't know the name. They are focused on this visualization. There are a lot of AGV manufacturers or ASRS manufacturer. They contract this software. They render in a perfect way the shop floor. And I don't know the names of these softwares, but FlexSim is, as a discrete event simulation, is getting closer to this software area. I don't know exactly the name of them. I don't know if you guys.
But if you want a real looking simulation, you can use Unreal Engine directly or Unity, and you can build something with that looks, it's like a game, with perfect graphs. But this is not, at the end, this is not the purpose of this simulation software, I guess. Mostly, at least not AnyLogic's purpose is not that. And I guess most of these other simulation software, they want to look good, but they don't want, I don't know if they want this level of perfection.
Right. Well, and it's really how you're going to spend your resources. Because, I mean, granted, FlexSim is probably going to have a whole lot more resources now, but all things considered, AnyLogic and Simio are still very, very tiny companies. I don't know how many full-time employee Simio has, but in terms of software development, it's probably 10 or less if I had to guess and memory serves. So it's, are you going to add features or are you going to add graphics? It's really, how do you proportion resources? And for most people like us, we want new features. We want the ability to simulate more things easier,
Yeah. Well, Christian, back to this question I asked Jacob, like, what is something you tried to simulate in either plant simulation or FlexSim that you actually were not able to simulate? Or
actually, I haven't faced such a challenge. I mean, I think it was all sort of time. I needed more time, but at the end, yeah, I delayed the project, but at the end I was able. There was no project that I had to abort, I just asked more time. In plant simulation, I had to code more because it requires coding, and at that time I was not so efficient in coding. And in FlexSim was a automated storage and retrieval system with ASRS, and the simulation to run 3 months of orders, it took 5 days of running.
That
And
is brutal.
Because it had 18,000 pallet positions, and process flow was crashing because of my fault, because I let the tokens to go on infinite loops. And when a token go in an infinite loop, FlexSim crashes. And the point was to find out where the infinite loop was. And so like after 2 days or 3 days of running interruptedly, in the morning, 8 o'clock, I was coming into the office with my heart beating and FlexSim crashed. And so I had to start all over again. But at the end, it was not FlexSim fault. It was my fault that I could not, I let this happen. Then I could correct and start all over again, But it was not FlexSim fault.
Yeah, so it's important to differentiate that, because all this software, they take a long time to really understand fully, if you ever understand it fully. And most of the times is the modeler's fault that something is not doable, because they just don't know. Like, if you see all the beginners, we work with a lot of beginners in AnyLogic, and they just cannot find a solution without a help. They think it's impossible sometimes. And so it's important to differentiate that. Like the case in Simio that Jacob told was a agent-based requirement, and Simio is not good with agent-based, so that makes sense. Now the question is, can you do that using the processes that you already have and the tokens and stuff? I don't know. Because
I could have faked like agent-based in Simio for that project, but it would have been it wouldn't have run well enough to make it worth doing.
Yeah.
But go back, to the debugging side of things, I think that's one reason why it's easy to get stuck in a particular thing is I can code pretty well in AnyLogic, but something breaks in a Simio model. I know that software so well and how to debug so efficiently. That's where the big time changes comes in for me, is I can fix things a lot faster in Simio than I could in AnyLogic. And that's really with the learning curve, and like in each software has its own weird things where things get stuck, right? Like there was one project I was working in Simio. One of the really good features of Simio is a replication runner. So you can set up as many runs as you want, and it'll throw different random number streams at it. Well, so I was doing, for this one particular scenario, was doing 10 runs. 9 of them were working and 1 was failing. So there was something in one of the random number streams that would crash the model. So I had to figure that out. And it actually took me 3 weeks to find the bug
Wait,
because it
what
was so
this was AnyLogic or Simio?
Simio.
Ah.
And so it's just like one of those things where it's like, even with my knowledge and abilities with Simio, it took me 3 weeks to find the bugs because it was so obscure that this is just one of the funny stories. I actually dreamed the solution to that problem. Like I've been working on it for weeks, and I had a dream, and I found it in the dream. I went to work the next day, and it was exactly where it was in my dream, and I fixed it. And I told my boss, at the time, I was like, as soon as I find this, because he was actually was a former systems modeling employee, so he was pretty good with Arena and a simulation guy. I was like, Nate, the moment I find this bug, I'm going home. I don't care what time it is. Like, that's cool. And I found it like 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning on a Friday. It's like, dude, I'm leaving. He's like, see you on Monday. You know?
Well, let me tell you that you're not alone in this dream thing. I have dreamt plenty of times solutions that I couldn't find during the day. This is something that I think that happens to a lot of people, actually. You just dream the solution. But sometimes you dream a solution and it's not a solution.
Yeah.
It's like you have to be lucky.
Well, it's on something like along that lines. Like people are like, "Why aren't you at your desk working?" And like so many of like the breakthroughs that come through with modeling is like, I go for a walk with a notebook and just start, drawing things out, and that's where I do a lot of my work. And then I come back and model it. So that is a weird thing for a lot of people, especially who don't understand modeling. Is it doesn't look like I'm working when I'm actually working very, very hard. I'm just like at a whiteboard or on a walk or something.
Yeah, this reminds me someone like doing software development. He was saying, yeah, part of my work is checking social media because when I check social media randomly, that clears my mind. And then when I go back into the problem, I have a fresh mind into find a completely new solution. And this is true. You need to take a walk. You cannot stay 3 hours trying to solve one bug. It doesn't work.
Absolutely, I agree. As you get stuck and you just can't find any solution until you have a walk, you think to something else. Yeah, you have a cold shower and then the idea pops up. Yeah.
For people ask me like what's the best tool to have for simulation, I'm just like a really big whiteboard. Like that you'll do so much work on that whiteboard to like to help you get through solutions. Like I've written probably like 150 process blocks, chains of things for Simio before I ever put them in the software. And it's just like yes, your best friend is a really big whiteboard when you do simulation.
Yeah, well, I have a booklet where I draw stuff. I draw a lot of stuff. Like a booklet lasts for very little time before I expire all the pages. Well, when we talk about let's talk about testing, because finding bugs is a problem that we suffer a lot with. This is the thing that we suffer the most. Yeah. And in order to avoid that, it's a good idea to do like unit tests, right? Like in AnyLogic, you can do unit tests by integrating with JUnit. But I have used it a few times, but I really need to be in a situation in which I'm working with a lot of people and doing a really big project for it to be actually worth it. So what is your experience, you guys, with testing? Do you have any testing methodology or framework you use in order to be able to avoid this suffering?
Well, a lot of that starts before you even start coding with the spec and understanding the data, what's in scope, what's out of scope, what you're looking at. So like I always tell people, because everyone hates the scoping and specking process before the project starts. So I'm like, look, it's painful now, but every day we spend here is a week saved on the back end, and that's been pretty true throughout my career. And so a lot of that starts there for me. But again, with like Simio and stuff, it's okay. So you have your base data, if you can use historical data, that's great. But then you start going, okay, well, we have our base that's running. Now let's start throwing different variables because, with most things, some are, inputs, some aren't. And so you start really throwing random large variant inputs at it to see if it breaks. So, what happens if the average goes from 5 a minute to 50 a minute? Will this still work? And so I do a lot of the extreme testings early on once I get what I think is a stable model. And I also like to do incremental testing. As you're building the model, you very rigorously test this part. Once you're happy with that part, you move on to the next. Can't always do that depending on the model, but that's how I kind of like to do it.
Yeah, but then you're talking a little bit about the robustness of the model. When you talk about sensibility testing and extreme cases testing, you're actually doing you are seeing if your model is robust to handle extreme cases, right?
Right. Well, but also especially with a lot of models with extreme randomness, once you start throwing really random larger numbers, smaller numbers, whatever at it, one of those ultra random 1 in a million events is bound to happen. And then you can find the bugs that only happen when that particular event happens. That was happening with what I was talking about. It was a super, super ultra low probability event that finally got triggered that found a very small gap in my code. And so it's all about throwing enough stuff at it that you can trigger those super low random probability events.
Mm-hmm. Christian?
I agree with Jacob. The most difficult debugging is in these cases of a high variability, that the bugs occurs just when that event happens with that small variability. So this is really the most difficult testing. But fortunately, in my project, I haven't faced much of it. So when I have this, when this is the case, I try to replicate that event, especially with that variability event. I try to focus the model on that event.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I do incremental testing. So I try to test small modeling incremental. So I just model a small activity and then just test it right away. I don't wait to build the whole model and then test it, because then you don't know where it's more difficult to find the root cause of the bug. Once instead you have just modified a small piece of code, is much easier to find. So that.
But do you find that in any of the software that you have used, finding bugs is easier, independently, or like assuming that you are perfectly proficient in all of the software?
I mean, in my experience, Simio's trace was a lot more robust than AnyLogic's, and finding bugs is faster in Simio for me. But there's also a lot of, again, this kind of goes to knowing the software, and like there are certain best practices in Simio that I would recommend for finding bugs that I've been using forever. So if there is a bug, I can because of the best practices and how I design models, you're going to pick it up faster because you understand where it should be if it is going to break.
But can you give an example, like a concrete example of that?
Well, like one thing you can do in Simio is in the process steps, you can give them colors. And when you run the trace, that step is colored in the trace. So, if you give an assigned step a yellow, which is actually, I use green for my assigns, but that particular one will be green. So if you think there's a problem in a certain chunk of code, you can color code it, and then it's color coded in the trace itself, which helps really pinpoint, okay, I know for a fact these 4 pieces of code are doing this particular thing because I can see it quickly. And so I tend to color code a lot, or if I think there's going to be, and this is pretty common for just coding in general, of throwing in like, okay, I'm really worried about a break here or something. So you throw, a break point or conditional break point of it's only going to break if something really bad happens. And that's other things. And so if you look at my code, um, I have a lot of like, at least in Simio, they're called notifies that place at different places of I need to know exactly what's happening when it gets here. And so I have a very very color coded. So when it hits, I can see it in the trace immediately, and I can either throw a pause, break point on it or whatever, and that really helps. So you can see the code, you can see the token process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Jacob, when you're talking of color coding, where are these colors appearing through the codes, or?
So if you're running, if you think of it's similar to Reno with the process flow, right? So you can just color code it in the properties of the step itself. You can pick a color, and then when the trace is running, the text trace, when it hits that particular one, it will match the color, so it'll be highlighted. So say you have a yellow, that entire process chain for that block will be highlighted in yellow.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, and in AnyLogic, you can also do that. Nevertheless, I don't do it. I never thought about even doing that kind of thing.
I mean, that is one of those things that I do a lot of. It's real. I didn't realize it until I've been using Simio. I think it's always been in there, but it's something I didn't realize until I've been probably using Simio for 6 or 7 years. And then I like figured that out. And so I actually have a list that I keep in my Google Drive of all the colors I use. So if I go whatever project I use, I color code every step. Like it's a very colorful model.
That's interesting. You have your own color framework.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah. So AnyLogic Pro included this functionality like later on where you can color code. But yeah, I never use it.
I don't know if FlexSim has this color coding inside the programming, but yeah, I also use breakpoints or conditional breakpoints. So I think both in FlexSim and plant simulation, I think they are the most useful tools you can debug with, for sure. Yeah, breakpoints. So, and also in process flow, not just in coding, but all the process flow activity in FlexSim, you can place a breakpoint there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you can trace a specific token passing through a specific flow. So you can really go into the details when that specific event happens, you break point. So, and when Jacob was talking about color coding, I was thinking in the color I'm using, I use the colors as well in order to have clarity of flow. So all the items that flow, flow items are colored in my models. It helps also to have a clearer flow, clearer process, and also indirectly also to debug. Yeah, coloring is also it's something. It comes from lean manufacturing, and identification, clear identification of the flow on the shop floor. So it's something I want to use also inside the models. That's why my company is called WCM Simulation. It means world-class manufacturing simulation. I want to kind of merge simulation with lean manufacturing. So I try to use lean manufacturing concepts inside the simulation. So it's all colorful. My flow items are all colored. It gives meaning. Colors have meaning. They can show meaning to the user and also to the modeler.
I also use colors a lot for debugging. Like if you have an agent, you put a color in this agent to understand what is the state in which it is. If that is everybody uses that. Like using the log file using colors, that's a bit something else. In terms of debugging in AnyLogic, I also use you can use the debugging tool to have a breakpoint, but for some reason, like this debugging tool, it slows me down. I feel compared to to other potential techniques, or just doing a trace in the log file. But I guess that's more of a style, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that is the thing about like simulation. Is like I tell people when I talk about it, is like everyone's different. Like, and I've known people well enough that like if I were to see one of their models without knowing it's theirs, I could tell it was theirs by just how it's designed, set up. Like, even like my dad, like if I were to see one of his models, I would know it right away because the way he codes is very, very unique to him, and the way I code is probably very unique to me. And I'm sure Christian's the same way. If you know, like, you could probably see a FlexSim model from somebody else, they'd be like, "Oh, that's so and so." Very obviously by like the techniques they use.
Yeah, that's great, and it's easy. It's funny to see how you recognize yourself. Like one time, I saw a model in the they sent me a model saying that, can you fix this because this is my model. They said that it was their model, and if I can fix them. And I saw the model and I said, this is weird. Like, I recognize this is kind of my style, you know. I thought it was my style, and then I remember that actually I did the beginning of that model like years ago, and it was actually my model, and the person who sent it to me didn't even know that. So I recognize my own style, which is funny.
Yes. Another tool Plant Simulation has for debugging is called the suspended methods. It gives you all the suspended methods that are into a wait until status.
Oh, interesting.
You can see all of them, and you can pick one, open it, and you see where it's looping, what the loop is, it's waiting. That's also a cool tool. I think Plant Simulation for debugging is really well structured. It has class breakpoints and instance breakpoints. So you can also go to the detail of the instance.
That's cool.
And it has all these hierarchies. Well done. I think Plant Simulation from this standpoint is really well structured. Yeah, but yeah, unfortunately it has other flaws.
This is like for debugging, this is sort of something that happened, especially when I was at FedEx, which is because I would need to be able to track the state of the model pretty much every minute. And so I would generally have, this is something that I still generally do, is there's going to be certain attributes, states, whatever, that I need to track throughout the entire model run. And those files, since they're pumping out a new line every model minute, those are really helpful for debugging because you can be like, okay, well, what's going on at hour 7 right here in this process? This is wrong. And then you can kind of really start narrowing it down that way as well.
Yeah, well, that's debugging life.
What about AnyLogic, Felipe, in debugging?
No, AnyLogic for debug. If you had the debug tool, like you can use breakpoints anywhere you want. It's absolutely like it's very complete. You have sometimes this difficulty when you run like a Monte Carlo experiment with different variations that we talked about before, and then it's difficult. The thing is that you can use random generators that generate the same numbers all the time, but AnyLogic has these libraries, for example, the pedestrian library, that doesn't actually follow the movements or the when agents move in free space, they don't follow the rules of this random generation that gives you the same results all the time. So you cannot have full reproducibility. This is the biggest problem I have in some of the models. And since you cannot reproduce, if you have this thing that causes a problem once every million runs, it's absolutely crazy to find where the problem is. But yeah, with experience, you start seeing like the problems are always the same. Like there was this weird problem where you have a person moving and the people move, like the pedestrian library, they move with momentum. So when they move with momentum, if they're really close to a wall and then I send them to somewhere else, they will think that they're inside the wall. So they will give you an error. And this happens so rarely that it's very difficult to find. But otherwise, besides this aside, AnyLogic has a very complete set of debugging features that makes it actually quite easy to debug. And yeah, so I've never been in a situation like Jacob with 3 weeks of debugging, finding a bug. That has never happened to me. Maybe 2 days, maybe has been the worst one. With a model that runs for 24 hours and you have to run it for 24 hours and you see that there's a problem in hour 23, and that's a bit...
The problem gets more complicated, more time consuming if the run is really long, like in my project. It was a 5 days run. So to debug, it takes so long.
Yeah, that's all. I mean, I think it might also be like somewhat unique to what I had to do most of my career. Like most of my model runtimes are at minimum a month. Like we're simulating 30 days of activity, so even if it runs fast, if it's breaking, day 27, that can take a while just to run it to that point. It can take 10 minutes.
Yeah, and the event, the bug happens after 27 days.
Mm-hmm.
No, but you're talking about simulation days or real
simulation
life
days?
No,
simulation days.
I was talking about real days, real time.
Oh.
So you run it during the night, and you see that there's a problem in the morning.
I've had to do that, but for the most part, I've gotten efficient enough especially with Simio, that I never have run times, even if we're running for a month, that are more than an hour. So I've gotten very, very efficient with my Simio code. It's very quick.
Well, that's good. Yeah, when we get more experience, obviously, like the bugs will be reduced, I think. But for, as I said, like for really big projects, I would definitely use unit testing, because the bugs occur when you change something and you don't even remember what was the collateral effect of changing something. And even worse, when you work with a team in the same model, like someone else changes something you did a month ago, and this has a collateral damage that you need automated unit testing to solve this problem. But yeah, the problem with unit testing is that it takes way longer to develop a model if you do unit testing. So it's a bet, it's a bit of a bet if you want to do it or not.
Yeah, you're talking about like you recognizing your own code. Like I remember a couple of times I'd pull up some old models and like, what idiot wrote this code? It's awful. Then I'm like, oh right, that's me. I was the idiot who wrote this awful code.
Yeah, sometimes you're coding so fast and you need to like have a deadline. You create patches of solutions, but not the real solutions, just patches, which makes it work, but it's not efficient. So then you go back 2 months later and you say, what was I doing? I didn't even comment my code, so I don't even know what my past self was thinking about.
Yeah, when you are in a rush to deliver, the code is for sure it's really poor. You have to go afterward to make it better, to improve, to comment it. Yeah, it happens all the time with me as well.
Yeah, so that's the question. What is more important, the deadline or the quality of the code?
Deadline. You got to ship, man. You got to ship that code no matter what.
Yeah, the deadline is the most important thing. That's what it is. That's the truth.
Yeah. Then if I have time when the project is finished, I go back and fix it if I have time.
Yeah. But you never have time. There's never time.
Usually, because I always my clients are in the manufacturing sector, I sometimes, especially with AGVs, I reuse my code. So I sort in plant simulation, I reuse it. I created some libraries that I reuse.
Hmm.
So anytime in any project, I make an improvement through all the codes,
Hmm.
or at least pieces of code. So after any project, my library is 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. It evolves constantly.
Yeah, that's also one of those fun things, like especially when you use a software a lot, you figure out like the really weird tricks that you can do that makes things faster. Like in Simio, because it's all C sharp and like very Microsoft based. If you like copy a process block and paste it into Word, it creates an XML file, and you can actually like edit the block in XML if you want to do like batch changes, copy it and paste it back into Simio from the Word file, and it'll work. It's really bizarre, but for some reason it works. Those little tricks or like those increments that you can do, like once you really learn a software, is interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting
Yeah.
trick. People do that in
I
general,
do it all the time.
or is
I don't know.
yours?
I don't know if anyone else does it, but I do it all the time.
Yeah, sometimes we do unique things that nobody else does, and yeah, might
Or
be the case.
like, I mean, if you're familiar with especially like the process flow in Simio, some of those processes can be like 150, 200 blocks. And so what I'll do sometimes is for those big blocks, if I need to change like a variable, right? Instead of having to go through each block and change it manually, because Simio doesn't have a great find and replace function like AnyLogic does. That is something I do remember from AnyLogic. Like the replace function was really good. What I'll do is I can take that entire process thing, copy it, paste it into a Word document, do a search and replace there, and paste it back, and it'll be a completely new process that'll work, no problem. It once I figured out how to do that, it saved me hours and hours and hours.
But you're talking about hard coding there, right? Because if you have a process, you're talking about hard coding numbers in the process.
Or like maybe I need like the exact same process, but it needs to work with a different variable name. How to like change that variable name really fast, right? Which happens a lot. Not as much anymore because of how I tend to code in Simio versus how most people tend to code in Simio. Um, but it has a way to do it, like because every once in a while I would need like a process that is identical, but instead of working with machine one, it needs to work with machine two. And you have to change like a variable name, right? But that variable name could be there 100 times. It's a way just to do it that really fast.
In FlexSim, you can also copy and paste the logic onto the process flow dashboard. I
Oh,
don't know.
interesting.
I don't remember if you can do it in AnyLogic. Can you, Felipe?
But I don't understand what you're saying there.
Um, when you're creating the flow in AnyLogic,
Yeah.
with your activity and you connect them, correct?
Mm-hmm.
What's the name of that
Yeah.
window
I don't
in
know.
AnyLogic?
I don't know how you call it. Like I call it a canvas because it's like a
Yeah,
blank
yeah,
sheet.
yeah. The canvas. Can you copy all the canvas and paste it into a new project in AnyLogic? Can you do that?
You can copy the whole. You can just copy the agent, the whole agent. Why do you? You can do
Okay,
that.
okay. You can. So yeah, that's also something useful. Yeah, to copy and paste. Yeah, the agent in your case. I think in FlexSim you cannot do that. I prefer to, I highlight all the window, all the canvas. Uh,
Yeah, but
Control C and Control V.
because with flexing you have the with also with Simi you have the 3D like animation. You have the process flows which you
Yeah, you have the 3D
where you use
and the process.
tokens. I know that 3D is a bit difficult to copy paste everything, but with the process flows where you use tokens, it's quite easy. You can just copy paste, right?
Yeah, yeah, we can do that. And it's no, I'm talking about the reusability of the code. It's something as a senior modeler you can do to fast on your projects, and copy good piece of code, something you trust on.
Yeah. Well, in terms of reusability, AnyLogic is king there. Like you can just create objects of any kind. I guess in plant simulation you can do that as well.
As you
Pretty
can
easy.
export, you can import and export, yes, so whole classes, and also the graphics. You can also, yeah, export either the graphics or also the graphic with the some logic embedded. Yeah.
Well, changing topic a little bit to artificial intelligence. Like there, 3 years ago in 2020, there was 2019, like there was this huge thing about using reinforcing learning within in the AnyLogic world. Everything was about reinforcing learning, and there was PathMind and Microsoft Bonsai, which were the tools to do reinforcement learning in AnyLogic. They died. I wonder what the real story about all that is, but right now there's no option to do reinforcement learning in AnyLogic that is really usable. What is the situation with Simio and FlexSim and plant simulation?
I know that FlexSim has developed a platform to do this reinforcement learning, but personally I've never applied it. My clients never asked me to do so, first of all. Yeah, that's the most important thing. I many times you don't need to go so into, the client doesn't need to go so deep. I think with the tool you have in a simulator, you can satisfy the customer's needs 99.9%.
Yeah, it depends on the business case really, but
yes,
I also didn't get too many reinforcing learning projects, but there has been a lot of possibilities in which reinforcing learning can be applied, but since it's so expensive to do it, it wasn't done at the end. Like for example, Microsoft Bonsai, we're working with a company. We did a big simulation model with them, and we were thinking about using reinforcing learning. And we had meetings with Microsoft Bonsai, and it would cost like $300,000 just to try to implement it without really a guarantee that it will work perfect as expected. And
it takes a lot of time to integrate.
But Simio has its own also reinforcing learning tool there, right? I don't know if you have used it.
I haven't used it, so I don't know what they all have. I don't know what's available currently in that sector.
Yeah. So.
And about plant simulation, I'm not aware of reinforcement learning tool or integration, actually. Yeah, it's something, it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort to do, yeah, as you said, and you're not quite sure if it gives you value, an added value, maybe in some projects, specific and big project, with big corporations.
We did one project reinforcing learning using I presented in 2019, or 2020. I presented in the AnyLogic conference. We did reinforcing learning for a machine using PathMind, and yeah, the results were not perfect, and the effort was crazy. Months to do it, and it required even more work.
Yeah, it seems to me that what a normal software tool, simulator software tool gives you, it's like it satisfies 90% 99% of the customer's needs. And this reinforcement learning can give you some more accuracy, but it's so tiny. It seems to me the added value that it gives, the cost benefit, maybe it doesn't pay off.
Yeah, the cost benefit is really the mystery for me, because since it was so expensive with Microsoft on site to work with them, that means that there are projects that you can make 1 million easy per day even, if you improve your processes using reinforcement learning. But
yeah, it depends on the payback you have. Yeah.
well, but you guys, you don't have experience doing reinforcement learning in any project, so
Yeah.
let's move on with. I want to talk also about, I don't know if you have done anything related to generative AI and simulations, or
I haven't had the chance to do it a lot. I've spent a lot of time with generative AI, ChatGPT, whatnot. I've gotten pretty good with it, and now that last month, I think it was, OpenAI rolled out custom GPTs that you can sort of train and make your own inside of ChatGPT. That would be really interesting to see how it would work. And I have some ideas of how to get it done, and how I would use it. Another thing I've tried vaguely, just playing with it, is I had an old spec from a really small little project, and I was like, hey, ChatGPT, use SymPy and write a simulation model based off of this spec. It was pretty close. I mean, there was still some coding that needed to be done to change it, but for something that didn't take all that long for the AI to build, it wasn't bad. Like, it actually produced some results. I was kind of impressed.
What was the process? A complicated one or a simple one? Because I did a video about this.
It was a really simple, I don't remember it was like a changeover. It was a changeover process from when I worked at Shutterfly. It was just basically, if we add one more SKU, what does that do to the process? How many more changeovers are we going to have to do because of everything? And how will the changeover process take too long, is essentially what the project was. So really, really small. And it built a pretty decent SymPy model. I was pretty impressed.
When I tried it, I just used a queue and a process, the simplest thing you can ever do, like an MM1 queuing system. And it wasn't, I was using ChatGPT 3.5. Now, when you use the 4.0,
4 is light years ahead of 3.5.
Yeah, so I think it's unfair, because what we also did is we tried to use. I made a competition a while ago that I gave a model to do in 3 hours to someone, and they had to do it to see how far they could get in 3 hours, just as a comparison. And a month ago, I did the same using ChatGPT 4.0 and ChatGPT 3.5 to see if someone a complete beginner could use ChatGPT to build a model in AnyLogic. And well, then is when I realized that ChatGPT 4.0 was significantly better, because it actually gives you like good results, but also a beginner doesn't know what to ask to ChatGPT. They don't even know what to do. So on the one side, the beginner doesn't get any results. The advanced user gets results, but actually it could have been faster to do it yourself. So maybe there's a sweet spot in the middle in which you're kind of intermediate, and you can use ChatGPT to help you develop a model and make it faster.
Right. And I think a lot of that would be like, especially like code debugging, or even like, hey, I need this thing. Like I've used it a lot with Python, and there's stuff I know how to write, but it can just write it faster than I can. That's and so it'll be, I could see punching in some really large like Simio formulas and be like, hey, I'm getting this error, fix it, instead of having to like break it down, go through it, whatever, have
Mm.
it do it for me. That's how I see using it a lot in
Yeah,
my day to day.
but you're talking about Simio there, or about SymPy. So it's
Well, even like Simio, like if I like, when sometimes you got to write some really large, pieces of code inside the process blocks, and sometimes there's errors, and finding stuff like where the unbalanced parentheses is not great in Simio, and even simple stuff like that being like, hey, there's an unbalanced parentheses, fix it for me, or see this, super long piece of code, I need these three variables change quickly. That's some areas I could see using it. With AnyLogic is with how Java heavy it can be. Having it write a lot of Java code for you is another place where it could be very fast and help just speed things up. But again, like you're saying, you need to know what you're doing so you can ask the right questions. Where a new, novice won't. They won't know how to do the project, even though if they did, they could figure it out, but they don't, right?
yeah, yeah, but you're right. Like for debugging, it's great because like finding a parenthesis that is unbalanced is ridiculously difficult. So you just ask ChatGPT, and you might have the good answer, but not always. You don't always get the right answer, and ChatGPT can make it even worse, right?
Yeah, it's like anything else. Like if you don't know the limitations of the tool itself, it can really screw things up. And so I've definitely had some interesting results with ChatGPT for all the different things I've done with it.
Yeah, but for example, if you work with SymPy, you can use the ChatGPT autopilot. There's an autopilot that can help you build code in PyCharm, I think. You have it?
Yeah, or you could do it in like a Visual Studio Code. They have the autopilot as well,
Yeah, so
and you can do Python in there.
Yeah, you have it directly there, so you can just be you have everything on the same place. With AnyLogic or Simio or FlexSim or whatever, you need to actually open your ChatGPT window, put the code, ask the right question. It's a bit of a different process.
Right. Yeah.
And also with Python, it's just coding. It's nothing else but coding. With these other things, it's not only coding. So there's a bit of a different conceptual how you behave with this ChatGPT thing is a bit different. What I found that ChatGPT does good as well is when you want to build. I don't know. You guys don't work with system dynamics, right? You haven't ever. It's like
training. Yeah,
but ChatGPT, I tell him like, tell it, not him. Just I have this conceptual idea, and build me the system dynamics model, and it will do it pretty well compared to building a process model. That's better for some reason, from what I've tested. But yeah, you still have you need the ChatGPT window on the side. But it's like in the last conference, AnyLogic has a bit of a secret of doing something with the generative AI that they will implement, but they didn't want to say anything. So maybe they will build something. We will see.
Maybe something embedded inside the tool, like a copilot inside the tool.
Yeah, that's the idea in any of this software, actually.
Yeah.
Having a copilot, actually pretty useful. Even I think the copilot in Python, when you're writing the code and when you're making mistakes, it can tell you like what the error is.
Yeah, it's pretty fast. I kind of know in my head how you could sync it up with Simio to an extent, but it would take some doing, just knowing how both APIs work. Because I've actually used the OpenAI ChatGPT API a bit just to play around and test with it. So knowing how those two could interact could be interesting, but like I don't think I have the wherewithal of brain power to actually make it work. Someone smarter than me would need to do it.
Yeah, we'll have to wait, but it will be interesting how the future will behave.
Mm-hmm.
Well, something else I want to talk about is the learning curve about all these softwares. AnyLogic is pretty steep.
It
You
can
can
be.
you can develop something simple pretty fast, but you discover more and more that you are more and more limited. And there's a since AnyLogic is a bit more versatile, you have more options. One of the things that is very difficult in the beginning is to choose whether you are going to use a process-based model or an agent-based model,
Mm-hmm.
or a mix. And the style that you use is kind of difficult to grasp. And it's difficult to choose, and you can make the wrong choice. When I was a beginner, I made the wrong choice, like doing something with agent-based for some reason, and I discovered that it was a very bad idea. So I had to redo everything. You don't have these problems in Simio or FlexSim because you can only do it in one way, right? So, but what have you seen is the curve of learning for these tools?
I would say that Simio was a faster uptake for sure. I mean, I hadn't touched anything really when I started learning Simio. I picked up really quick. It made sense. The just interface, drag and drop, add code, etc. AnyLogic was a bit harder when I had to learn it for the Red Cross, but it's not terrible. But the paradigm is very different because, like I said,
You don't have tokens in AnyLogic.
you don't have tokens. The disconnection of AnyLogic is a disconnected system, right? Like where FlexSim and Simio are much more integrated, where you drop a server, that's graphics. There's a lot of stuff in there already. You can, change it. AnyLogic's a lot different, and so it's how does your brain work better, which one or the other? FlexSim and Simio makes more sense to me personally, but I know people who AnyLogic, because it is more code forward in general, that just makes more sense to them. And so I think a lot of the learning curve comes from your background and what really how your brain likes to work. So like I said, I've used all three of them professionally. FlexSim and Simio are a lot more like philosophically similar. I mean, probably, you can tell because they've sued each other like 5 times. It's kind of funny. But
what did they sue about?
Oh, infringing patents that, this is too similar to us, vice versa. It's been going on for years. But so for me, Simio and FlexSim just makes more sense versus AnyLogic. I'm not saying AnyLogic isn't great. It can't do a lot of stuff because obviously it can. It just doesn't make as much sense to me personally.
Yeah, the other thing is that with FlexSim, you can actually build a crazy complex model with zero coding.
Mm-hmm.
While in AnyLogic, without coding, you can't get too far.
Right.
And the same is Simio. In Simio, you don't even need to code mostly. And another one with Visual Components, when I talked to these guys from Visual Components, when I asked, hey, if I want to do something customized, where do I code? And they said, why do you need to code ever? They just want to build these tools that don't require you to code.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a sort of a problem in learning how to code in FlexSim. I would like to code, but I don't need. Yeah, I would say for my experience, I can compare plant simulation and FlexSim. It's much faster FlexSim. The learning curve is much faster because I'm not. My background is an engineer, an industrial engineer, not software engineer. So FlexSim doesn't require me to code. So for me, it was much faster.
Yeah. So then the question is, because you can build crazy things in FlexSim without coding. But the question is, what added value would you get by coding some stuff instead of doing things with the process blocks and tokens and stuff?
Well, for me, I could tell you like the easiest one is it's hard to do like in Simio if you want to do a loop, right? Like a do while loop essentially. There's a lot of blocks, and especially if you need nested loops, the way the process flow works can get really cluttered. And tracking tokens can be very difficult. And AnyLogic, you can just write a nested do while loop with like 12 lines of code and it's going to work. So that's where the trade-off is that's a very simple idea, but in my head, that's always was one of the really nice things about AnyLogic is I know how to write a while loop, right? And you can just write it instead of having to use 20 process blocks with different things and whatever. You can just do it in AnyLogic versus like a Simio or a FlexSim where you don't have to code as much, but it takes longer to do.
In the past, AnyLogic had this, well, still there, but it's not visible. You had the action scripts. How's it called? I don't even remember the name. It's the action. What's the name? I don't remember. But you did instead of coding, you would write the if statements, and it has like a for loops, and you can draw them. But yeah, this made everything much more complicated, in my opinion. And it was a good thing they removed it. I don't know if you used them.
I never use them, but again, because it is cumbersome, like if I can avoid using a loop, I do in Simio because one, they can be very difficult to debug, and it's just way easier in AnyLogic to just write the stupid piece of code, instead of having to like connect all these blocks and everything else.
Yeah, sometimes in AnyLogic, I feel that I'm just only coding, and there's like a few pieces of things that are there, but it's mostly coding. Like
my perception is that if you know how to code, it's still the best way. But if you're a beginner, not coding, having something that is not, you don't have to code, it makes the learning process faster. But if you know how to code, if you're a senior, modeler, and you know how to code, I think it's still the way. Coding is the best way.
It can be faster, and like I'm kind of a tweener kind of thing with Simio is like you can use like the math.if statements from C#, and so instead of having like nested decides, like if true go here, if false go here, and having those decision trees, sometimes I'll write just a really big nested if statement that create, instead of having like 10 decide blocks, it's just one assign step with a big nested if statement inside of it, which reduces code and a lot of other things. And so it's sort of, I will use a lot of code when I need to, but it's also nice having the process blocks and the drag and drop abilities for things as well. And also for me, I've gotten to the point where I use almost no pre-made objects from Simio. I create my own special objects inside of Simio itself. So that's another thing where I kind of code and do my own thing there as well.
What is awesome about this process flow is that it joins two things together. It's a white canvas, and you are creating your process, and at the same time you are coding without even knowing that you are coding. You are coding. And so with these arrows, you just can move the tokens back and forth, and you easily, remodel the process. So you're doing two things at once. You're creating your process and you're coding. So this is awesome about process flow, FlexSim process flow.
So you mean you're coding, but actually without knowing you're coding, like in the background. The code is being created by you just dragging and dropping and
Yeah,
doing arrows.
it's called low coding, soft coding, because actually you're not coding, but
Yeah,
in each activity of process flow, you can open the programming that is behind, and you can see there is some code behind it, correct? So there is coding, yes, but you don't know. You at least you cannot see it at once.
yeah, like I didn't hear about this concept for a long time. Like, because yeah, you're right that putting blocks in there which create a logic is actually, you can say, a programming language. It's true. One thing that is, hmm?
I think it's the way this soft coding. It's the way because it makes the coding faster, and yeah, for a beginner especially. And then you can access the code if you want. If you don't want, you don't need. But if you want, you can access the code and make some changes and improvements. So it makes softer the learning process of a code of C++ in this case, or Flex script in FlexSim. Makes it less traumatic for someone that is not a software engineer.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, that's a good thing in actually, like, yeah, because you have the process that you draw and you can just see the code in Flex script and just change it and then you go back. So there's a versatility
Yes.
in the way you can do things, and you can have your own modeling style in that way.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
fast.
It's one thing that I've seen that people have trouble like moving from Simio or FlexSim to AnyLogic because they have the concept of tokens in their minds, and the fact that AnyLogic doesn't use them makes them a bit confused.
And I've seen the flip of that, where people who aren't used to that token and that idea have a hard time with it coming into like a Simio. Because like until you fully grasp that token concept, Simio a lot isn't available to you in Simio until you really understand how to manipulate the tokens. And some people I've seen have a hard time going from that no token concept to a heavy token concept.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, for me it was I didn't have this experience when I learned FlexSim because I used to work with Camunda, which is business process modeling notation, where you work with tokens. So when I started using FlexSim and I saw these tokens going on, this was like it was the same idea as the business process modeling, which is very similar. But yeah, I would understand if someone he didn't know that about tokens in any form would have a problem there. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's easier to go from Simio to FlexSim or FlexSim to Simio than to Simio from Simio to AnyLogic for AnyLogic to Simio.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying earlier. Like FlexSim and Simio are very philosophically similar, and AnyLogic is very not. And so, like, they are very. And if that philosophy of AnyLogic works better for you, it's just going to be a lot easier to learn. But like those two, like Simio and FlexSim, are very similar, and AnyLogic is sort of the other one.
What about plan simulation in comparison with these other ones? In terms of the philosophy behind it?
Yeah, it's
Unfortunately, I have never used plan simulation, unfortunately,
Yeah,
so
I
I don't
haven't
know.
either. I've looked at it, but I've never used it.
I mean, you just have the 3D and the hard coding. You don't have any middle tool. So it's
So do you have tokens in there? You can
no, no,
how do you
no.
build the processes are only built through 3D blocks, like the FlexSim 3D blocks, and that's it.
And you have controls. So every 3D object, like a process, a station, for example, it has, you open up a window, a configuration window, and there you have controls. You have exit controls, entry controls, and it's there you link the controls to a piece of code. So this is the interface between the 3D and the coding. So, but there is no any middle tool. It's hard coding, essentially hard coding, and a lot of parameters. You have parameters. You can input some values, some process times.
So you would
But
say it's more similar to AnyLogic from what you're describing.
yeah, but you don't have any Canva. Like in AnyLogic, you have a Canva where you draw your flow, you draw your activity, correct? Your process activity, you connect them with arrows, you connect them. There is no such a connection on any Canva with the plant simulation. It's either 3D. You can connect obviously the 3D objects, but other than that, it's just hard coding. If you want to stop, for example, a flow item at any station, you need to code.
Okay, and you mostly code or mostly draw?
You mostly code. I mean, 80% of the efforts in plant simulation is coding. That's why
Yeah.
the learning curve is steep.
So at the end, it's the same in AnyLogic. Like the highest percentage is coding as well.
Really, I thought I didn't know that because I've done just training, but I haven't done any project. But the perception I had is that it was highly configurable. You could configure a lot of parameters without coding, and
I mean, you can do a lot of stuff without coding, but you don't get too far. Like coding is absolutely necessary for anything that is serious. And it's also maybe 80%, 90% even coding, depending on if you're doing agent based, it's 99% coding.
I see.
If you're doing processes, it maybe 60, 70%, but still a lot of coding. You need to code. Otherwise, I mean, small models, you can do them. I think at some point in the past, they wanted to show AnyLogic as something you didn't really need to code, and they would train people like that, but I'm not sure how they're doing it now. How long did you do the training? How long ago?
It was 4 years ago.
Yeah, 4 years ago. And you had the impression at the end of the training that you actually didn't need to code so much.
Yes, that was my impression.
And you did the 3 days training, right?
Yes, and then I also have done the intermediate one, more other 3 days of intermediate.
And still you had the same perception. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm coding for nothing.
No.
But what is your impression, Jacob? You have used AnyLogic.
I mean, there is some stuff you can get by without coding, but I mean, honestly, the ability to inject code directly is one of the most powerful things of AnyLogic. And so if you're not doing it, I think you're doing yourself a disservice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true. Well, the only exception is if you use system dynamics. System dynamics doesn't need any coding.
That makes sense, yeah.
But that's it. But system dynamics in AnyLogic is a bit less powerful compared to things like Stella, which are only for system dynamics. They have more features. So in order to replicate those same features in AnyLogic, you need to code.
Right. But that's the thing with especially the 3 packages we talked about. They're very general simulation packages. They're meant to be able to do everything. I mean, I'm sure there are certain packages that are designed for very specific things that are very robust for that one thing,
Yeah, it's not a complaint at all from my part. I love how AnyLogic does the system dynamics thing. I actually prefer to use, because I used FlexSim, which is another system dynamic software for a long time, but I prefer AnyLogic in all cases. So yeah, and there's a lot of potential when you mix agent based with system dynamics. A lot of things you can do there. And so yeah, no complaints at all. And well, another thing I want to talk about is I don't know how much time you want to.
I'll probably need to jump about 1 o'clock. I got some things I need to wrap up, but I'm up for a few more minutes.
Yeah, okay. So let's finish the conversation with like a bit talking about the community related to this, how you use the community or your customer service from Simio, FlexSim, Plan Simulation. When it comes to solve problems, how do you get help?
Well, I mean, generally, if I run into an issue with the software itself, Simio has always been really good about figuring it out, fixing it pretty quick. Especially early on. I mean, we were doing projects while they were still in their beta stage, and I was breaking that software every 30 minutes, and they were always really good, and they've always been really good about helping out. Or if I can't figure something out, be like, hey, what's this? How do I do this? And it's really quick. Um, I don't generally go out to other people. I may ask like my father for advice, or like I've got some other friends who I may go to, but for the most part, I've I can figure it out on my own when it comes to Simio. I mean, there might be other like structural stuff, like, hey, I've got this really weird project. Do you have some thoughts, or have you worked on something like it before? But the actual like coding, I don't have to reach out too often.
Yeah, and do you have a framework to help people if they have problems?
I mean, if someone needs help, be like, hey, how do I do this? Like, yeah, I'll be like, hey, I think this is how we do it. Or if I don't know, like, give me a little bit and I can try and figure it out.
No, but I'm asking for, because with AnyLogic you have Stack Overflow where people
Mm.
ask questions and I can answer if I want, or the LinkedIn
Yeah, the
user group.
LinkedIn is helpful. That is also another thing that's really helpful with AnyLogic versus like Simio, is since it's Java based, pretty much every Java specific question has been asked over the last 25 years and is somewhere on the internet. It is really easy to find. That is something I did enjoy when I was using AnyLogic, was if there was a Java specific question, finding the answer was not difficult.
That's true. What about FlexSim Plan Simulation in terms
I
of
think I
getting?
think both community works well, and they're very quite used. Um, and yeah, I think they're really useful. I am more like I'm using more less. Let's give, I more use the community than rather than answering questions. But for the learning, yeah, they can short the learning curve quite a lot. And they works both in FlexSim and in plant simulation. They works with the only detail that in plant simulation, you need to access the community, you need to be a user. You need to have the software. So it's restricted, so it's more limited than on Flex. In Flexing community, you don't need to have a license, a professional license.
Yeah,
Anybody
but
can access the
FlexSim,
community.
yeah, FlexSim has a forum with questions, right? If
Yes,
I remember correctly.
yes,
And it's just you ask questions there, right?
yes, and
To
they answer
and
pretty fast. Yeah, it works.
Yeah. And the customer service in FlexSim, or you just ask the community, how is the situation?
Yeah,
Because
if
because
sometimes I had to use the FlexSim support if the community was not able to answer my question.
yeah,
Yeah, it happens
uh,
to me.
but they help pretty fast as well.
Yes, so yes, they do. They do.
So AnyLogic has this customer service as well. Works pretty fast as well.
Yeah, you send the model and yeah,
Yeah.
they debug it with you. Or yeah. Yeah, the only point is that with the plant simulation, you need to have it's restricted
Yeah,
because
but if it's not restricted, I'm not going to. If I don't have plant simulation, why would I use the community anyways, right?
to learn, as a beginner, you would like to use the community to learn. That's
Yeah,
why.
yeah, yeah.
So it prevents beginners to speed up their learning process. Whereas with FlexSim, anybody can ask a question.
Yeah, that's the thing. FlexSim, Simio, and AnyLogic are quite open to the world. They use it in the universities. Plant simulation is another story.
Yes.
But the plant simulation has the LinkedIn users group as well. But
Yes, they have, but I think it's not quite used now. It's more the community, the Siemens community.
Yeah. Well, guys, it's almost 1, so
appreciate
let's
the
wrap it
time.
up.
It was fun. Yeah.
Thank you for the initiative, Felipe. It was nice. It was really useful to exchange ideas with experts like you.
A lot of fun to have simulation conversations because normally we don't have simulation friends around.
It's very true.
We just look like weirdos when we talk about simulations.
It's a small community, I think, compared to other maybe.
Yeah.
Correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you a lot for being here. And
well, I ended things a little bit abruptly, but I hope you enjoyed this video. If you watched till the end, congratulations. And see you on the next one.